will take care of it. I don't know that.
Yeah, so while Bangalore is in popular imagination dependent on Kaveri, the role that groundwater plays in Bangalore and the dependence that we all have on wells and borewells is very high. And the estimates is that perhaps pipe water supply is the supplementary source and groundwater is perhaps the primary source. Perhaps that's the larger context. And before we talk about borewells, I think it's important to recognize and understand that shallow aquifers, meaning open wells, has always been a part of our culture. The lakes and the wells have always been linked. This is a well near Jakur Lake, which even today yields around 100,000 liters per day, right? And it's important to keep reminding ourselves that this is the historical context and this is living history, the wells that we see, and we need to protect it. The water from the open wells is cheaper. It's more kind of susceptible to surface contaminations than what we do. Therefore, if we rely on this water, we'll be more responsible on what we do on the surface. It's less energy intensive, it's less costly. Imagine Kaveri water is actually coming from around 500 meters below Bangalore and 100 kilometers away. So that's the larger context. And even bore wells, which are going down now to depths of 900 feet, 1,000 feet, are actually shallower than lifting water all the way from Kaveri. So that's the overall context in which we are talking about groundwater and bore wells and open wells. And we need to keep open wells in mind when we do speak about bore wells. I think that's an important thing we need to keep in mind. What is an open well and what is a bore well? I think it's important to understand that. And if you look at the geology of Bangalore, it's broadly a 3 or 4 layer geology. The first layer is topsoil. The organic matter comes from there, the nutrients for the vegetation comes from there. We are of course destroying it at very fast rates. But below that topsoil is something called the weathered zone. The weathered zone is essentially rock that has been powdered to what looks like soil. It has an enormous capacity to hold water between its spaces. Below this weathered zone is a zone called a fractured zone, which is rock, but it's fractured. And so it has capacity to hold water and a very high capacity to make that water move around. And below that is something called bedrock with neither the capacity to hold water nor for it to move water. Right? So the bedrock forms the bed above which the water table is building up. Typically the weathered zone, which is what you see as soil mostly, which is where most of our open wells are tearing into. So what is an open well? It's really a hole in the ground that goes down typically to the weathered zone, and it has water if that weathered zone has water. Whereas a bore well is a much narrower hole that goes way deeper. It typically goes into the fractured zone, where it's tapping into water that's coming from the cracks and the fissures of the rock. The weathered zone and the fractured zone are vertically many times connected. So the shallow aquifer many times is recharging or putting water into the deeper aquifer. Earlier, all domestic purposes was primarily driven by open wells. The lakes recharged water. The lakes were an economic backbone in the sense that irrigation was driven by the lakes. And wells became a way in which domestic water was met. Then 80s, the borewells came and we started using borewells, and what the borewells did is because it started pulling water out from the deeper zones, it started drying up the shallower aquifers slowly. So that's what an open well is and what a borewell is. Also notice that many things that we do on the surface, for example, there are soak pits that are shown there. They are all actually operating in the weathered zone. And if that is done, if we don't treat our wastewater, if we are very careless and irresponsible with the way we deal with our wastewater, that will eventually start finding its way, those pollutants, contaminants will eventually start finding its way to open wells and then finally to bore wells. The advantage for bore wells is that it has a very, very large part of earth filtering it, the weathered zone filtering it, and therefore the quality of the water tends to be free from pathogens and microbes and things like that. But because it's passing through earth, it's picking up more salts, picking up more minerals, so it tends to have contaminants which are more geological. Sometimes it's part geological, part man-made, because we are reducing our water tables and digging deeper and deeper and going to places where new kinds of salts and minerals are coming into our borewell water. So that's the geological understanding of water. Where is the water getting into all of this? The ultimate source again is the rain, through a process called recharge. There are natural processes of recharge through lakes, but increasingly there are ways we can do artificial recharge, because what we are doing is paving the surface and cutting off the source of recharge by hardening the surface. And how we can integrate artificial recharge into our management thinking around aquifers, we'll touch upon a little later. So here's just a picture of a few wells to understand the weathered zone and later, also the way borewells work. You see there are three kinds of wells. This well here on the left is a well which is completely in the hard rock, where the hard rock or the fractured zone is almost at the surface. So water is really coming from rocks into this well. It is still an open well, remember. If you see the one on the top right hand corner, there is a mix of weathered zone and hard rock there. So what you see as little, granite masonry work, beautiful granite masonry work, that is where the weathered zone is. And weathered zone, because of its nature, can collapse. So you need masonry to keep it structurally integral. So you see where there is hard rock, there is no masonry, whereas where there is a weathered zone, there is masonry. And the bottom one, again the Jaipur lake, is completely, near the Jaipur lake, is completely the weathered zone. So you see dry stone masonry, holding the whole well together. These pictures are important because it will help us imagine how a borewell will look inside, and that's what I'm getting to next. So if you look at a borewell, this is a much narrower hole going right down. Here it's the same layers shown, but what the casing does is it replaces what the dry stone masonry does in the open wells. You have the casing, which was earlier mild steel casing or steel casings, and now typically it's PVC casings, which holds the hole, the structural integrity of the hole, where there's no weathered zone, because otherwise it's soil and it can collapse onto itself. Whereas as soon as you reach rock, because a hole in the rock doesn't collapse, you don't really need a casing there. So that's the first thing we need to understand about our borewells. It's a deep hole, so there's a total depth. There is a depth of casing, right? And the depth of casing is telling us something. It's saying that I hit rock here at a certain depth. So till the rock, it's the weathered zone, and traditionally open wells existed here. Below the casing is the rock, and that's the zone where more and more of our borewells are taking water from. Even within this fractured zone, you can have different kind of densities of fracture as you move in depth. And when the densities of fracture are all high and they are all interlinked, it forms what we call an aquifer. So there is one aquifer in the weathered zone, which is called the unconfined aquifer, because it's not under pressure. It behaves more or less like an open water body in terms of the pressure variations. Whereas the aquifers in the rock may be under pressure, right? And you can have different layers of aquifers even in the rock part. So as you drill the hole, what will happen as you move through the rock is you will find cracks and fissures, and as you are drilling, you will find little what you will see as streams coming and falling into this hole that you are drilling. And you may hit that at different points. So if you see here it shows some point here it shows some points here, and this could be multiple points depending on the place you are in. But after you finish drilling, what will happen is all this water will come and it will stabilize at a certain level. When all the pressure variations, normalize. And the pressure of the water in this column will be the pressure that's holding all the water in these aquifers back as far as this borewell goes. So the next thing that one needs to understand about borewells is this different points at which you are hitting the water, where these cracks and fissures are giving water into the borewell. And the third thing you need to remember is that you then hang a pump, and you can choose to hang that pump at any depth in the borewell. Tendency is competitive digging, so you dig deep as possible. You're doing one, so you dig very deep. And tendency is to put the pump as low as possible. When you do that, remember your energy cost of water is going up, right? And what is happening when you put in that mentality is you're already saying, I'm going to empty the aquifers, the shallower aquifers, and I want my pump to be so that I can tap into the deepest aquifer that exists. And that allows you sudden access to a lot of water, which means, and And unlike an open well, where you see the water level moving up and down, and therefore it's talking to you. You know, borewell is switching on and switching off. So you just switch on the thing and you just get the water out, and then one day you have to switch it off. So that's the disadvantage of the borewell. But these things, to understand about borewell, the depth, the total depth, the depth of the casing, the depth at which this water level stabilizes, the depth at which you put your pump, these are important things, and these form, to use more modern terminology, data points that allow us to begin to understand our wells and our aquifers. And often we forget to look at this data. When you dig a borewell, you're supposed to get a borewell out from a borewell driller. And it's important to ask for it. And he's supposed to document all this that I've just said as a part of that borewell log. And if you were to take all the borewell logs in the city and put it together, you can actually come up with an aquifer map of the city, but we are not doing it, right? And we could be understanding aquifers at sub-aquifer level, at very local levels, and evolving management responses based on this understanding, but unfortunately that's not happening. Just another quick thing, if you go to the channel Zenbrain Man, there is a little video called Borewell, Workings, Fissures and Water and Hard Rock, which actually shows a camera going down a borewell, and everything I've explained, you can actually see it as it goes down. So this is a resource that you can use offline, go to YouTube, look at it, actually see everything that I've talked about as a camera goes down this borewell. Also, there are a lot of FAQs on borewells, on borewell logs, how they can look at, etc. on groundwaters.in. Please remember, it's not www.groundwaters.in, but groundwaters.in. We may move this to a more formal space soon. We'll keep you informed on that. But that's a place where you can go and look at many FAQs and many resources explaining some of the things that I'm talking about here. So what about borewell water quality? I just touched upon that briefly in the beginning. Most borewells tend, especially as you go deeper, tend not to have too much problems as far as microbial contamination goes. But the water quality problems tend to revolve around what is in aggregate called TDS. Essentially, it's some or the other form of salt dissolved. Solving the water quality problem will then mean investment. So the entire industry of softeners, of ROs, etc. is really built around a shift from surface waters to groundwaters, especially deeper groundwaters. In fact, some of the late problems of foaming is happening because increasing groundwater use means that the detergent industry responds with more foaming agents. Because as TDS goes higher, the water is not responding to the soap. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle that we are building for ourselves. Here are some pictures of my own filter. With TDS, this is from borewell water with TDS around 400 or 500, that's all. And just because this water is has some residence time in the filter, you can see the kind of salt deposit in the filter. And if you see the desirable limits, BIS standards 2500 2012 is the quality standards for India for water. You can Google it, you will get all the parameters. The parameter TDS, the desirable limit is 500 and the permissible limit is 2000. Even when it's less than the desirable limit, the TDS levels, this is the kind of maintenance problems you're creating. This also means stains on tiles, stains on patre, vessels, supposed problems of hairfall, a lot of problems of scaling with solar water heaters scaling with the things. So the cost of borewell water in economic terms from a quality perspective, I don't know if there's anybody who's actually assessing and measuring that. In terms of regulations, there's the Karnataka Groundwater Act 2011, that's in thing right now. In my understanding, the center has post this created a model Groundwater Act which changes the principles and philosophy behind it, but that's still work in progress. It's yet to be adopted by the states. But as of now, essentially what has been done is based on CGWB's studies, different areas of Karnataka have been declared as notified or non-notified. Notified means groundwater exploitation has happened there. And for all those areas, there is something called a groundwater authority at the district level. And the groundwater authority is now supposed to control the development and extraction of groundwater here, regulate it. So what it means is and Bangalore, the entirety of Bangalore is a notified area, both urban and rural. And for urban Bangalore, BWSSB is the point person for the groundwater, as the groundwater authority. What are you supposed to do? If you have an existing borewell, or if you're going to dig a new borewell, you have to fill out a whole bunch of forms. Those forms are available. Again, you can go to biometrust.blogspot.in. There is a detailed thing of which form you have to download from where, etc. there. But you have to fill in this form, and by the time you fill in the data in the form, you're going to go nuts. But then that's the way it is. You have to fill in this form, give it to the groundwater authority. They will either give you permission or not give you permission, right? And they will give you permission with a certain set of conditionalities. Even after you get permission, you're supposed to give data about how much groundwater you're using from the borewell. And you're supposed to use only those drillers who are registered and authorized by the groundwater authority. And the driller is supposed to drill only when you have a permit from the authority. So that's the regulatory mechanism. Enforcement, as we know, is difficult. Not only weak, it's very, very difficult. How do you do it? Everybody can be drilling holes in the ground. So, but that's the regulatory environment as of today. And with the help of BWSSB, because BWSSB is now going registering the borewells, this is the officially registered number of borewells in Bangalore. And that is around 319,211. Most significant of them coming actually from the area which has Kaveri water supply, because BWSSB registers borewells whenever it gets connections. Post this act, post 2012, the registrations of borewells that have happened is not a proactive registration that BWSSB has done, but those law-abiding citizens who decided I will register my borewell, they have been added to this list. This is the BWSSB division map, this is not the ward map of Bangalore. If you were to overlay the ward map of Bangalore onto this, you will find many areas outside this. And therefore the real number of borewells, there have been academic studies to show it's more than 400,000. How much more we still don't know. So that's a lot of unregistered bore. Yeah, so I don't know, the number of pluses, I don't know how many pluses to put there. That's why I left it as a question mark. But this is indicative of the rate at which we are drilling borewells. What I have of my personal experience seeing, I've gone to communities, multiple times after many years. One pattern one sees is that when I go to a community, I work with them, their borewell depths are something. I go back 3 years later, some of those borewells have dried up, and they have to drill deeper to actually get water. So that's one pattern I observe. The second pattern I observed over the last 1.5 decades of work around this is that even to get the first successful borewell, communities have to drill far more number of borewells that don't yield to hit that first borewell that's yielding, right? So we need to really think about the trade-offs between putting money into drilling borewells that don't work and investing money in some new ideas, and I'll come to that as we speak. So the story, really, I think this picture captures the story. This is a picture of an open well in Bangalore next to Katamreddy. First, we walked down, used a bindigate, took water, went down. Then came the centrifugal pump which emptied our open well. Then we got the borewell here into the bed of the open well, and we dried that out. So that kind of captures perhaps the history from 1980s to now of what has been happening in groundwater. And groundwater does not feature in our planning, in our resource planning for water planning, right? So therefore, one of the first responses and one of the first kind of investments you can make, other than looking at drilling borewells and buying tank water, is to look at something called recharge. Because we are talking about borewells, I first introduced the idea of direct borewell recharge, where if you have a borewell which was once yielding but is now not yielding, then what you can do is you can take clean water and put it back into the borewell. I won't get into the engineering details, but essentially you are taking clean water and putting it back into the aquifers in the rock zone in this method, right? But there is a simpler way, a cheaper way to do it, and that is to dig open wells where you can, even if it is dry, and try and put good water into the open well. The difference between this and this is, in this way, you're putting water into the deeper aquifers. Here you're putting water back into the shallower aquifers. Here, therefore, if there is some small contaminations in the water, there is a lot of earth to actually filter those contaminations out. In that sense, from protecting a large pool from contaminations, this is much safer. Second, shallow aquifers can begin to respond more quickly than deeper aquifers simply because it takes much longer to go down deeper, right? And therefore, local shallow aquifers can come up if we use this method of recharge, which means you could perhaps be looking at developing a local shallow aquifer which you begin to use for water, for your water, which is cheaper, which is less energy intensive, and all the other advantages with it. Right, and you can integrate these recharge wells into your master plan. You can retrofit it so that it lends itself. It needs very little real estate. What it really needs is a bit of engagement to keep looking into your open well and see what's happening there. Right? See just pictures of how this can be done. This is an example of how a recharge well has been done around a borewell casing. So what you see here is a borewell casing. So the psychological notion that my recharge is going back to my borewell, right? So in summary, what am I saying? I'm saying that while we think about borewells, less about open wells these days, we need to think more about it. Borewells as a source of water, while we think about tankers as a source of water. Many cases I've seen drinking water, people just blindly buy bottled water regularly as a source of water. And for those lucky few who actually get pipe recovery water, this is how we think. We all think about supply of water. But then, if we talk about borewells, if we talk about groundwater management, and if we talk about the challenges of the city and how we need to respond to it, we need to think about two or three completely new ways of looking at this. And that is, first, demand management. First, are we using water responsibly? Do we really need to use as much water as this? I think that is that should be the starting point of our response to questions like, should I get a borewell? Should I go to tankers? What should I do for my supply of water? First, to look at the demand side of water and say, am I using really just the water I need, or am I using it excessively? Second, how do I integrate rainwater and wastewater management? Rainwater is the rain that's falling on your head, which you can store and directly use, or you can recharge in the ways that I just spoke about, right? Then, how much of my wastewater am I really reusing? If those three things you bring into the picture, right, and there are many ways of doing that, then you are beginning to talk about the response at both the individual level and at the city level of the water problem. And that's really going to be the response to deepening borewells and rising tank water prices, right? Because I spoke about demand, the town actually plans its water supply based on these numbers. These are slightly outdated in terms of how it actually happens on the ground. But the important thing is 135 liters per capita per day. And what we found normally is upwardly mobile, communities are using 250 liters per capita per day, 300 liters per capita per day, right? So the demand management angle is extremely, extremely critical. And remember that in responding and in solving and integrating these ideas, we bring a whole new set of people as a part of the solution. And we should redefine our engagement with them. The welders, the plumbers. What I find time and again is our relationship with them is as though they are labor. Whereas they are also people with knowledge, they also bring a certain knowledge. And to accord them the dignity and be fair about the wages, the haggling around some of the pricing. I think even that's a problem, because that becomes a hurdle for the city to move forward. Can we create livelihoods? Green jobs is the thing of the hour. These are green jobs, right? But this green jobs, if it has to be economically viable, also has to change the relationship between these kind of service providers and many of us who avail their services. And I just wanted to end with with this little thing. This is the Borewells temple, not far from here, near the Nandi hills. This is from the Vijayanagar kingdom, this Kalyani. And this is said to be the source of a river, the primary river of Bangalore. It's not Kaveri, it's not Akavati or Vishwavati, it's the Dakshin Pinakini. 2/3 of Bangalore is in this river basin. We don't have it in our mind, right? The unfortunate thing is that we are now digging borewells to fill water in this Kalyani, which was once a source of water. So I want to bring that metaphor in, and I also want to bring this metaphor in to reconnect one more thing, bring one more idea, realize one more thing, that rivers get their water from something called base flows, and those base flows are, why are rivers perennial? When there is the monsoon, of course there's surface runoff which goes into the river, but when there is no rains, the river is getting its water from oozing groundwater. Essentially, it's the aquifers are full, and where there are pressure points, it oozes out that water. And by pumping more and more and more, we are not just drying up our groundwater, we are actually drying up our rivers. And Arcavati is the testimony to that. And ATRI, has actually done a very formal research to establish that pumping is the biggest culprit for why Arcavati is dried up. So I just want to stop with this metaphor, and we can then talk about other questions. Those are all the different sites in which you can avail all kinds of information about wells, borewells, groundwater, and